Alright, so we're doing chapter 3 today, and this chapter is basically like a warning. So, what it's warning us about is simply there always has beware of evil, beware of dogs, beware of the concision, circumcision which worship God in spirit and rejoice, right? So, because we worship God, we will always have enemies, but even if we have enemies, always rejoice in the Lord, right? And we all have a certain level of trust in the flesh, but we have to be realizing that we can't serve two gods. In other words, we can't be in an earthly manner and want to worship God. But as you see here, what things were gain of me, those I counted lost in Christ, right? And this is what we're talking about the flesh, right? And it say, I count all things for loss, but the excellency of the knowledge of Jesus Christ, my God, for whom I have suffered the loss of all things, and do count them but dung, that I may win Christ. That particular piece literally means that we're supposed to give up everything for God. And the one thing nobody could ever take away is when they call knowledge. People call it wisdom, people call it understanding, people call it experience, and people call it education. That's the one thing somebody can't take away from you, right? So even though you know the gospel and you decide to fall back, there's no excuse to say, well, you don't know, unless you like end up with Alzheimer's or something, God forbid. But otherwise, what you know of God, and when you go for judgment, you can't tell God, well, I did not know, right? And here he said, we have to have, through the faith of Christ, the righteousness which is of God by faith. We have to know that we are righteous by faith. God isn't going to come down in the flesh and be like, well, you're righteous, I made you righteous, that you are saved. When we are saved and we do the altar call, it's through faith, right? We have no proof. Even though we do baptism, if your faith doesn't align with God's righteousness, then you will always live in guilt. If you don't believe that God forgiven you, then your sin will replay over and over in your mind, and it will consume you and make you feel guilty. Okay? And they're talking about here how God has the power, but the power of the resurrection, and what his suffering means, right? It's to attain the resurrection of the dead, that we already attained it. Once he died, we gained the victory over death, basically. Death has no sting. Yes, even though this body will pass away, our true, as they say here, citizenship is in heaven, right? And there were people they were talking about here that followed the Lord, and then they fell away, as we know as backsliders. For they say, for they are the enemies of the cross of Christ, and they once walk with God. And that is why we always say to pray for one another, because we don't know what somebody else is going through. Especially when some people will be like, this Christian thing not working for me. That when I started to read my Bible and go to church, things get worse, and that's how it happened, because the devil doesn't want us to be there. Why will the devil attack somebody he already has? Think of it. He wants his God's people to fall away, and this is why we go through what we go through. If he had you in the grip and you wasn't worshiping God and you wasn't trying to live a righteous life, do you really think the devil have time for you? Right? So this is where they say you know your calling in God, right? And many are the perfect minded. If anything be otherwise, my God shall reveal even unto you. Right? So even things you don't know, you ask God for wisdom, right? And be one minded. Pray for one another, because people will fall away. Let us try and keep our citizenship. The word for conversation here is citizenship when it comes to God. So that's why I'm saying this particular topic is like a warning. So I hope I explained this fairly okay to you all.